The costumes of the superheroes are a very important part, especially in a live action, because there you can notice the big difference in every detail. In the comics the costumes are important, but the most important thing is the design and the colors, since we can't enjoy the textures well. However, in a movie or series, we can see the textures of any costume, and this can change the level of any superhero. The Power Rangers have always used spandex, a type of fabric that is very thin and very flexible. This fabric has the benefit that the stuntman can move more easily and thus can accomplish all the acrobatics that a ranger requires. The problem with this fabric is that it makes the superhero look weak, and the ranger costumes compensate for this with amazing helmets, gloves, boots, and some other details. In the new Cosmic Fury costumes, they used fake muscles to make the ranger look stronger, but the reality is that this was not such a good idea, since in some moments we could see that part bending, and this makes the ranger look bad. Although spandex is a material that works very well to have better mobility, the reality is that the Power Rangers need other types of materials in their costume to look better, and in the world of cinema there are many materials that may not be as flexible, but they will look much better. Another thing is that the materials they use to create a costume will also define the colors, since now they will have to change those bright colors and use more opaque tones. This doesn't mean that they must use dull colors, but by using different materials, then the colors change a little bit, and they don't look so bright. Because Power Rangers has always been for a children's audience, the series had to use very bright colors, as this is what is used to attract the attention of children. We could even notice that in the 2017 movie, which was aimed for a more adult audience, the colors are more opaque, but at the same time they were still quite eye-catching for us adults. If a child looks at the costumes in this movie, maybe the colors don't catch their eye as much, since they don't compare to the super bright colors that Power Rangers has always had. For those who don't know about this color thing, there is something called saturation, which is a word that applies to anything, and in colors it is used a lot. Saturation means when something is at its limit, and this can happen with anything in life. When you get to a place and there are a lot of people, then you can say that place is saturated, and when a color is very bright, you can also say it is saturated. For the opposite effect, we can use the word desaturated, and this is what people understand as dull colors. Here I will show you two examples so you can notice the difference between a suit with a saturated color and another suit with a desaturated color. We can notice that the saturated suit has an unrealistic color, but it is excellent for attracting attention, especially that of children. The desaturated color is a more realistic color and is excellent for creating movies to capture the attention of adults, as it gives a dark or epic style. Saturation is used depending on the mood you want to give to the character, even if this completely changes the style of the movie. For example, we can see that Captain America uses desaturated colors because he is an adult and serious character. However, Spider-Man uses saturated colors because he is a young character with a comedy personality. Even Spider-Man is the best example of what could have been the Power Rangers costumes from a long time ago, since his costumes are very flexible, but still look excellent and of a very good material. We can understand that the Ranger suits when the series started could have been of that material they have always had, but already in these modern times I think they can change the material and never have. We know that there are Ranger teams, like for example the Beast Morphers, which have a different style of costume with different materials, but the reality is that those have been some of the worst costumes in my opinion. There are many designers who have created spectacular costumes, and we can notice that the texture of the material is very different. Some textures look metallic, which we must be careful that the Rangers don't look like Iron Man again, but they are still amazing designs that represent the essence of the franchise very well. Obviously, these designs are still based on the old designs we already know, and for this, I challenge all those designers to come up with a completely new Power Rangers team. They must create a new team with a new theme and a new style. With this, they will be able to prove that they can be the creators of any new Power Rangers project. There are other materials that they have used in these designs that are very similar to the costumes of other superheroes, and they are combined materials that have a lot of spectacular details. These types of suits, in my opinion, are the best, but we don't know if they are going to be possible in real life, as they must work to be able to do all the stunts. We know that on many occasions when the stuntmen can't perform the stunts because of the suit, they use CGI for these parts, and if the production has a good budget, we are not really going to notice when the Ranger is created with CGI. The best example was the 2017 movie, where there are many parts where the Rangers are created with CGI, and we know there are certain moments where it's obvious, but that doesn't really matter to anyone. When the CGI is well done, no one minds if that scene is created on computer, and there are many examples of this. Obviously, we always strive for perfection because we want every project to look good and to be as unobtrusive as possible that it's CGI, because we lose the audience's connection. The problem with all this CGI is the price, as good CGI costs a lot of money to make, and this has been one of the biggest problems with Power Rangers since the beginning of the franchise. The battle moments have almost always been Sentai scenes, and these scenes have always been the most expensive. Even in Cosmic Fury they also used the Sentai Zord scenes, and while we're not sure if this was because of the budget, we believe that was the reason. If the new Power Rangers universe has a big budget, then it is possible that they can give us good CGI, and this means that they can also create excellent costumes for the Rangers. This is all obviously theories, since, despite having a good budget, excellent CGI, and all the things in favor of creating spectacular costumes, really the most important thing is still the designs. The best example of this is still the 2017 movie, as there they had a high budget and were also able to create excellent CGI, but unfortunately, the costume design is completely out of the essence of Power Rangers. The new designers for the costumes should be people who know Power Rangers very well, who make an analysis with the fans and look for good references so they can create costumes with all the essence of the franchise, but at the same time with a spectacular design. After we saw the beginning of the reboot in the toys and also in the comics, I got to thinking about the things that need to change in the movie Reboot. We already talked about the suits, but now we need to talk about the weapons, as they are another very important part of Power Rangers. We all know that for superhero stories weapons are very important. Even some weapons can change the course of any story and make a difference in many situations. Because Power Rangers has always been a project for a child audience, the weapons had to be colorful and had certain liberties. Some Power Rangers weapons are ridiculous to adults, but these weapons are possibly the most impressive to kids, and that's because they are somewhat creative. Since the reboot is going to be aimed at a more adult audience, then the weapons are something that should change quite a bit, and not only their design, but also their use. Some weapons look spectacular, but their use is quite unrealistic, like for example the shark sword, which looks spectacular, but its attack is quite crazy. This sword can stretch and travel all over the place to attack many enemies quite fast. This for a children's show is very entertaining, but for an adult show it would be a bit ridiculous. By this I don't mean that Power Rangers is something ridiculous, but that each program has its own style depending on the target audience and how much fantasy they want to give to that project. There are projects that are aimed at an adult audience and have some pretty crazy things that can be almost ridiculous, but that is precisely the style they want to give it. In this case, Power Rangers needs to be a little more serious in the reboot because in order to be successful it needs to change some things and have a little less silly fantasy. This is the hardest part as it is quite complicated to identify what can be categorized as silly fantasy and serious fantasy. In the category of weapons, we can identify it in their design and how they are used. Weapons are something quite serious and I think they could give a power to each one so that they can be something special. This falls under serious fantasy since a weapon having some special power is still a fantasy. A good example of a weapon that has a special power with a design that is full of fantasy but doesn't go to the extreme of being silly fantasy is Saba, the White Ranger sword from Mighty Morphin. This sword has a tiger head, has a life of its own, and at the same time is still a sword that the Ranger can use to fight like any other sword. Being a sword that he can use in battle gives it the realism it needs to be a serious weapon, but having a tiger head that can talk gives it the necessary fantasy without looking silly. In the comics, this sword is much more special as it has a great connection to the grid and can identify Rangers from other universes within the multiverse. Many have talked about how the reboot should be like the comics, and it is precisely this kind of thing that makes the comics so spectacular. They can give us enough fantasy without having to get ridiculous, and they stay on the serious side of the story. Some details of the weapons have a lot of similarity with the changes they must make with the costumes, and we all know that the weapons of each Ranger must match the costume. Previously, we had said that the colors of the costume should start to be opaquer, with desaturated colors and a little darker. This will give a little more seriousness to the project so that it looks like a movie production for adults and not something for a child audience. Basically, this is the same thing they should do with the weapons since many of them have bright colors like the Ranger's suit, and this sometimes makes them look like toys. This has been one of the weak points of some seasons, and is that the owners of the franchise have always wanted to sell Power Rangers toys since that is where they get the most profit. Because of this, they have created weapons that already look like toys so that when they make the real toys, then they look much more like the original object. One of the most iconic seasons in this was Dino Charge, and basically almost everything in that season looks like toys. Another important thing they need to change is utilization, and I'm not just talking about the ridiculous attacks that some weapons have, but also the way a Ranger can attack. Because Power Rangers is rated for a child audience, the attacks should be simple and not look like they are taking someone's life. We got to see this change a bit in the special episode when Rocky destroys one of the monsters and uses the sword in a different way, basically trying to stick the sword in his chest. This is something you can't see in a regular season of Power Rangers, and that's why they use small explosions in each attack in order to give it a little bit of impact. Obviously, the new Power Rangers projects are not going to be R-rated, so we are not going to see attacks as gory as we saw in the Logan movie, but we are going to see more violent attacks. For now, the weapons we have seen do not cause visible damage, as the result of each attack cannot be shown as something very graphic but must be something interpretive. This means that when a Ranger achieves an attack, then two things can happen: the monster falls to the ground and complains of pain, or it simply explodes and disappears. In a project where the rating is higher, as it is going to be in the reboot, the results of attacks can be different and much more graphical. For example, some attacks may cause the monster to break a limb, it could also bleed, and they could also have a more graphic death instead of just exploding. Don't get me wrong, I love seeing villains explode and having the background music fill that moment with a super epic feel, but this has no realism to it at all. There are moments in Power Rangers that are weird regarding this, as sometimes the monster is talking as if nothing happened and then explodes without having felt anything prior to the attack. An example of this was when Tariq attacked a monster, and the monster hadn't realized anything until it exploded. In the style that Power Rangers has, this is a perfect moment since it is comic, epic, and exaggerated, but in the style that the reboot might have, this would not work. In order to understand all this, you must think that the reboot can have the same style that the 2017 movie has, which was more realistic, and its fantasy did not reach the ridiculous. The story mixes all the reality with fantasy in order to create a fictional world, but with the seriousness of everyday life. Looking at it from that perspective, then imagine a ranger attacking a monster and the monster doesn't notice anything, but 2 seconds later it explodes. This is something that would be ridiculous in a style like this from the 2017 movie, and that's why the weapons should change to have a serious design with more realistic attacks, but full of serious fantasy. Write in the comments the types of weapons you would like to see in the reboot and what power they should have. Like this video and subscribe for more serious Power Rangers fantasy.